It's that time. Everything and anything basketball, presented by The Outrage. With Cajun Thirutani Castleman and host Spencer Byers, this is Polar Opposites.
Welcome everyone, Polar Opposites back again. A little bit late again, so we'll go with the Saturday edition / Sunday edition of Polar Opposites. Spencer Byers, Cajun Thirutani Castle, alongside me, of course. Cajun, happy to hear your lovely voice again.
Yes, sir. Glad to hear
And
you.
you don't gotta lie to me. It's okay. Anyway, we'll quickly talk about a guy who affected some mics a long time ago and has now gotten the outspoken label from the score article I read. Rudy Gobert got a very costly technical foul in the end in a loss to the Cleveland Cavaliers for his Minnesota Timberwolves. We will get into some injuries with them as well, but the Cleveland Cavaliers beat Minnesota 113-104 in overtime. But before they got to overtime, with 27 seconds left, Rudy Gobert fouls out, gets his sixth foul on a loose ball foul, and fouls out of the game. They're up by one at this point, Cage, are the Minnesota Timberwolves. Rudy Gobert then does the Money Manziel, finger rub, meaning the referees are on the take, is what he implied to Scott Foster, who made the call.
I agree with him.
Well, we'll get into that. Foster, who didn't even see it, didn't call the technical foul, was one of his other referees. And I was a female, I will mention, but referee Sago sees it, calls the technical foul, which then means the Cleveland Cavaliers get the ball still and a free throw. So they tie the game on the free throw by Darius Garland. They then have possession to win the game. They don't. The game goes to overtime, and again, they obviously lose, but without Gobert with the foul out, and then the technical forces it to go to overtime, the Cavs may not score in that possession, Cage, and the Timberwolves may win that game in regulation. So you do see it as a costly technical foul. But it continue, and that's just that individual game. The Cavs are a good team. Timberwolves are still a good team. It's not a bad loss to lose the Cleveland Cavaliers, in my opinion. But it continues an overarching story that we've talked about a lot on this podcast and it's been spoken about a lot across the scope of sports and I'll say sports media. Refereeing in the NBA is garbage. And it's been garbage. And it continues to be garbage. And my problem with it, Cage, honestly, is not that it's bad and not that it's just inconsistent, because that aggravates me to no end that it's so inconsistent. Fouls on one night are not fouls on another night, which is ridiculous. It's that nobody seems happy with it. Like, when it's one team or two teams or three teams that are upset at the refereeing, you can say, hey, those are outliers. When over half of the league has been upset and has been complaining about the officiating, you have to look at the problem at that point. Because how many times, Cage, have we come on to this very show and spoken about coaches going into the media and being ejected for yelling at referees, have been exploding at referees, have been going into the press conference and being fined for saying the referees were not good enough tonight. I can just think off the top of my head, Mike Brown with the Sacramento Kings bringing out the laptop, Quinn Snyder exploding at the referee for that illegal screen against the Raptors when Trae Young came up hobbling. Those are just the two ones coming straight to mind. Darko Rajakovic came out and complained about the referees and moaned. And there is a side of the coaches are just moaning. They are just complaining. But there is also a side of, well, when everybody's doing it, when every coach is complaining about the referees on any given night, can you really say it's a bias? Or can you just say they suck?
Wait, say that question again. Is there a bias towards refs, or do they just suck?
Well, it's not just a question, Kate. It's more just a statement. Like, you can't say they're biased because they just suck. Like, and everybody's complaining about it. You can't say it's a bias to the Lakers or to the Celtics or to, the Knicks, to a big market team, because everybody's complaining. Like, when all the coaches are complaining, then no one's really getting a bias. Back early in the early 2000s, when you think about some of the really roughly officiated games where you think, those quote unquote those games were fixed, whatever, what have you. That doesn't change the fact that now it's gone to a point where everybody thinks the referees suck. Nobody's saying, oh, the Lakers get special treatment, or the Celtics get special treatment, or the Knicks get special treatment. Nobody does. Like, they're just not good enough. And that's been a problem, and it feels like this year it's become more of a public problem because everyone's seeing it on any given night.
Yeah. I mean, every day, like, let me put it this way. If you hear about a referee and you know them based off of like first and last name, they're not a good ref. Unless that said ref looks like Gucci Mane. Or that said ref has had some memeable moments like Bill Kennedy. But even then, James Williams was at the center of a controversial ending with the Pistons and Knicks, in which a foul was not called on Dante DiVincenzo and Asar Thompson, and that led to a turnover and the game winner by Josh Hart. If you know these refs by their first and last names, I'm sorry, they're not good refs. There's a problem. And in the situation that is Rudy Gobert, that sort of gesture was more or less so a sense of frustration with what was going on all game with how he was being officiated. But was it a dumb time to do it? Yeah, it was a dumb time to do it because you were up one. The chance to get a stop, which he eventually did get a stop, but the problem is getting that technical gave Cleveland a free point in which there are giving them a free lifeline in which their offense was struggling all fourth quarter and all game too, might I add. But in terms of like the gambling reference, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. The way these refs have officiated, not only have they sucked, they've sucked so bad to the point it's like, are they making these calls on purpose? Is there a hidden agenda? And when Gobert made that statement, you definitely have to question that because of how terrible the officiating has been.
And again, that just continues the narrative, Cage, of just how much everybody's complained about it. Which again, I guess is an interesting thing of, and I'm not thinking Rudy Gobert's right. I don't believe that the referees are betting on games. I don't believe that. I would not disagree that it's easily more accessible than it's ever been to bet on games. That is that's an unequivocal fact. With how much is pushed in every sport, all of the advertising, it is more accessible than ever before to gamble on sports. So to think the referees are human and to think that they easily could is not, I think, a leap. Yes, I believe that they would not impugn the integrity of the sport. That doesn't change the fact that maybe they could.
It's already been done before.
Especially in basketball with, of course, Tim Donaghy.
Yeah.
And obviously, I think people, I don't know, I assume you saw it, Cage, the flagrant foul Netflix mini-series of The Untold of Tim Donaghy and him talking about how he did it and how he was friends with Scott Foster and how, that relationship ended because of him being taken out of the NBA for his gambling on NBA games while refereeing those NBA games. Obviously, he released a book that, said lots of things, and some of which were true, some of which obviously you don't believe are true, because, in all honesty, Tim Donaghy's not exactly a trustworthy guy. But again, it still leaves that little bit of doubt when it comes to a guy like Scott Foster, who's been in the NBA forever, but even other referees. Like, you gotta wonder once in a while, like, is well, not only we kind of know they target players, because I
Well,
think
case in
everyone's
point,
got
Scott
that
Foster
list.
and Chris Paul.
Hmm?
Case in point, Scott Foster and Chris Paul.
Which has been a very long-standing issue between the player and ref. But even so, like I feel like every referee's got that list of guys that they don't like. That every time they ref them, they have an attitude, they got an air, they don't say the right things, they don't do the right things. Like they're and that's human. You have a bias against somebody because you don't like them. But obviously, as a referee, umpire, whatever, your job is to be impartial. Regardless of your personal feelings, you need to be impartial. And I know it is very hard to do. So I'm not saying that I necessarily judge them for not being able to be impartial, but when it affects the game and it's your job, you don't get as much leeway as me as your local Tim Hortons worker.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see how much longer the referees stay in the news, and we'll see if Rudy Gobert is fined. We assume he will be fined,
Oh, you will.
but we have not heard of any fines as of yet. And with Rudy Gobert, I will mention that his teammate Karl Anthony Towns was not playing in that loss to the Cavs. He's torn his meniscus and will be out for at least a month from the reports I saw, but out indefinitely for sure. And Cage, there's been a litany of injuries around the NBA. LeBron James has been out with an ankle soreness. Steph Curry is out. The Warriors are hoping it is not a long injury. The Raptors have lost Pirtle and Barnes for the rest of the year. A lot of injuries going around the NBA. Which one do you think, Cage, will affect their team the most as we inch our way closer to the NBA playoffs?
Well, given that the Raptors are not a very good team this season, we can scratch them off the board. So in terms of injuries to playoff teams, obviously there's been Embiid from before. Now Mitchell and Mobley are sidelined. Mobley with an ankle sprain that he'll be reevaluated in a week, and Mitchell had a PRP injection in his knee. Then obviously there's Steph. There's LeBron James. Benedict. I don't know if you heard this, but Benedict Mathurin is having season-ending surgery on a torn labrum. So Canada's big one of Canada's finest young ballers. Chances of his season's done, and you got to wonder, is he in jeopardy of missing the Olympics too? Then obviously Maxey with the concussion. Booker's got an ankle sprain too. LeBron, Steph, and now Karl Anthony Towns. I think to me it has to be Steph. Because the offense runs through Steph. The offense is Steph. Steph's the offense.
As James Harden once said, Cage, he is the system.
But in Curry's case, that is absolutely the case. Steph Curry is the system. It just makes you wonder. It's just so unfortunate that all these injuries to stars are happening at the worst possible time. Because heading into the playoffs, you want to see teams at their healthiest. You hate to see injuries ruin a potential series, whether it's first round, second round, conference semifinals, conference finals, or even the finals. You hate to see you get marred by injuries. You hate to see what if scenarios. Case in point, 2019 NBA Finals when the Warriors didn't have KD. But yeah, in terms of whose injury I think will affect the most, It's got to be Steph.
You're gonna laugh at me
Yeah.
because I disagree with you. Because Steph's not going to be out, I don't think, long enough to truly affect the Warriors. The Warriors are kind of locked into that 10th spot in the play-in. They're a couple games back in 9th. They're like 5.5 games up on the Rockets for that 10 seed. I don't think Curry's going to be out long enough to truly affect their season. Obviously, you're right, though. Steph is a more pivotal piece to the
You think
Warriors than
it's
basically
Towns?
anybody else.
You think it's Towns?
I do think it's Towns, but here's why. Karl Anthony Towns is a talented basketball player. A player I don't like, and a player I think could be so much better if he had truly a work ethic, which he doesn't, which does upset me truly. Moreover, the Timberwolves are in a dogfight. From 1 to 4 in the Western Conference, they are separated by 2.5 games. The Thunder at 1 and the Clippers at 4 are separated by 2.5 games. The Timberwolves are half a game back of the Thunder for the top spot in the West. They're 2 games up on the Clippers for second. Clippers down in 4th. Without Towns for the next month, they could easily drop a couple games they should win, like they did against the Cavs, and fall down to 4th, which we can argue, playoff matchups in the West. Maybe you want 4th because you want the Pelicans. You don't want to deal with one of the play-in teams or the Suns, who are right now in 6th. But regardless, with a Timberwolves team that's played so well this year, with Towns in the lineup, and now not having him in the lineup, I think could cause very big problems for one of the Western Conference's best teams. And it could cause them in a very tight race to lose a couple games they would normally win and make them fall behind the Nuggets and fall behind the Clippers. And now they're going from a top 2 team to a top 4 team, which again isn't a far fall, but that changes who you play in the playoffs. It changes what side of the bracket you're on. Like if they finish second or third, they stay in the same side. If they fall to 4th, they got to play the Thunder. Or if the Nuggets jump them and get to 1st, they got to play the first place team in the West in the second round. Comparatively speaking, they'll have to play the second or third place team, depending on where they finish, if they stay in that side of the playoff bracket. So I think it's very important for the Timberwolves to try to keep themselves in that top 2 spot, or at least in the 3rd. They can't fall below the Clippers. But the Clippers, really good team. Nuggets, really good team. Reigning champs. Thunder, really good team.
Although
Like,
inexperienced, but a really good team.
Same thing with the Timberwolves, though. They're both in that same boat. I think the Thunder and the Timberwolves. They're very inexperienced. They're very young, other than probably Gobert. And even Cat, relatively. But still, I think Cat's the most pivotal because of the fight they're in, because of the lack of games. Like even the Cavs, when you look at it, they are half a game up on the Bucks, but they're counting quick 4.5 games up on the Knicks for 4th. So they're not that pressed. You know what I mean? To be losing guys, and they've been dealing with injuries all year, the Cavs. So they're used to this. The Timberwolves have been relatively healthy all year.
Yeah.
So it's going to be the first real adversity we've seen with the Timberwolves this season. And if they can keep themselves relatively where they are without Karl Anthony Towns, I think it just shows how good they are and how well they can do when they get to the playoffs and they have to play the Clippers in a 7-game series. They have to play the Nuggets in a 7-game series. They got to play the Mavs or the Warriors or the Lakers in a 7-game series. Because, it's going to be, they're going to have adversity playing any one of those litany of teams. So I think it's got to be Towns, Cage.
In that sense, I agree.
Well, who would have thunk it? I'm
Yeah.
fighting for Karl Anthony Towns. Who'd have thunk it?
You out of all people fighting for Karl.
Me out of all people saying Karl Anthony Towns is the most important injury. But I would say that, though, if it was Gobert or if it was Edwards as well. I just think because of how tight it is in the West, especially at the top, losing anybody is just going to hurt you very badly.
And I think the bigger issue is Minnesota has never really had a great offense. They've had a great defense, but not necessarily a great offense.
Well, that, and they don't have a lot of depth, comparatively speaking to other teams like the Clippers and the Nuggets, for example.
They
So,
do have
like,
some decent big man depth because having a guy like Nas Reed is huge.
yeah, I agree with that. But he's not Karl Anthony Towns. Like, no offense to Nas Reed.
I thought I was gonna hear. I was like, he's not Karl Anthony Towns. He's better.
Well, jokingly, yes, but Cat is a 40% free 3-point shooter.
Mhm.
Like that is really hard to replace. Even as a guy who is a Cat hater, like it's hard to replace a guy like that in an offense that you mentioned, Cage, is not that good.
Yeah.
And you already got a guy like Gobert in the middle that needs a floor spacer beside him. And Nas Reed did really well against the Cavs. 7 for 11 from 3, had 34 points in the win, or in the loss, pardon me. But still, like, can he keep that up with with the way the Timberwolves are going to look? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be hard for the Timberwolves to keep themselves, I think, above water when it comes to one of their better players being out. But you know what, Cage? I think we'll do it now. Before we move off of the NBA, Cage and I had a conversation off air, and we're going to bring it on air now because it's a fun argument. Who are the true superstars in the NBA? Who are the guys who get the label? Now, obviously, superstar I do think is an overused term. I think you'd agree with that, Cage. A
Mhm.
lot of guys get it without deserving it, but the guys who deserve it, Cage, we won't even argue about Jokic, no argument, superstar.
Mhm.
I think Luka Doncic, no argument, superstar.
Yes.
LeBron James, even at 39, no argument, superstar.
And as much as I trolled you for this off air, Tatum's up there too.
Jason Tatum, no argument, superstar. I thought you were gonna make me the argument. So if you're not gonna argue with me, Jason Tatum, superstar. So that's what, 4? Jokic, Tatum, LeBron, and Doncic. That's 4 superstars right there. Joel Embiid, I would say he's a superstar. Do you agree with me? Because I think even with the playoff inadequacies, I still think that he's probably a superstar because he averaged 30 a game, because he got the MVP, because he's in
I
the
don't like his
MVP
play
argument.
style, but yes. But yes, he is a superstar.
Well, that's 5. Is there anybody else want to bring to the table? Well, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, superstar? I would say so. First team All NBA last year, in the NBA or MVP conversation
I
this
want to
year.
put him in that. I want to put him in that list
But is he just the tier below so far?
until we see what he does in the postseason.
I'll be honest, Gage. I think I got one more guy I would call an actual superstar. And I'll say again, Steph Curry's in the same tier as LeBron. I would say Curry's in the same tier as LeBron. They're superstars because of what they've done, not necessarily because of what they are now.
Mm-hmm.
The last one I honestly think, Cage, would be Giannis. I think obviously Giannis is a superstar.
Oh no, maybe honest. I think he is.
No, that's what I mean. I think Giannis is a superstar. Kevin Durant, I would say he's a superstar, but he's in that same tier as LeBron and Curry, where they're older players, but they are still great players.
Yeah.
They've been superstars. This may be the first one we argue about, Cage, because I don't think Donovan Mitchell's a superstar. I think Donovan Mitchell is a top tier, next tier. He's a great star. I don't think he's a superstar. I don't.
I agree with that.
I think more we're going to argue about, Cage, because I'm not a big fan of this player. Devin Booker. Is Devin Booker a superstar? I don't think so. I think he's, again, a really good player, a star player. I don't think he's a superstar. I think there's a reason why you bring in Kevin Durant.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with me? Do you think Devin Booker's a superstar? Because I think he's just a great star.
I think he's on the cusp.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Jalen Brunson, is he in the superstar conversation? Because again, I personally would say no. I again would say he could be,
He could
but
be.
I don't think he is. Because again, I do think the superstar label, like, let's be honest, Cage. In all honesty, there's probably 10 guys at any given point in the NBA that are superstars. 10.
Mhm.
If you give it to more than 10 guys, are they really superstars? Like, there's
No.
not a superstar on every team. There's not 2 superstars on a team. And that's like Anthony Davis. You could argue is a superstar. I would say was a superstar. I don't know if he's consistent enough to be a superstar. I don't think he's healthy enough to be a superstar. Where I think it also comes in against Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid is a great player, but is he healthy enough to be a superstar?
Oh,
Like when he's on the floor.
I got one name that I think we both forgot to mention. Health wise, kind of bucked the trend this year. Kawhi.
Kawhi. That's a good name, Cage. Is Kawhi Leonard a superstar? I mean, it's hard to say no. Like it is hard to say no. In all honesty, it is hard to say no that Kawhi Leonard isn't a superstar. So yeah, I think you got to keep. I think you got to give the label because I think Kawhi's been a superstar, and
Mhm.
health has been his biggest issue. Like I wouldn't say last year we'd call him a superstar. I think this year you can say yes, Kawhi Leonard is a superstar because of what he's done previously, and he's back to that level now.
Yeah.
But I think that's where it stops. Like I wouldn't say Damian Lillard's a superstar.
No.
Like I don't then, and I'm not arguing what he did in Portland, but now we've seen it on a team with another star, with another a superstar, that he's not that. Like when you look at the Bucks, the best player on the Bucks is Giannis, and I no offense to Lillard, I don't think it's close. That's
Mm.
not an indictment on Damian Lillard. That's just how good Giannis Antetokounmpo is, in my opinion. Looking at the top point getters, Cage, I don't think De'Aaron Fox is a superstar. I would say he's a star, but I also don't even think he's with Jalen Brunson or Booker or Donovan Mitchell as like on the cusp. I think he's just a star to me. Trae Young, not a superstar. Anthony Edwards, I think is gonna be a superstar. I don't think he's there yet. Tyrese Maxey, I feel the same way.
Tyrese Halliburton.
That was gonna be the next name because he's not in the points for, but he's up there for assists. I would say Tyrese Halliburton is already becoming a star because obviously he needs to continue this play for at least another season, I would say.
Yeah.
But he's going to be a superstar. I would put him in the same bracket as the previously mentioned Mitchell, like Brunson, maybe like Booker and Anthony Edwards. Like I think he's in that tier where he will be a superstar. It's just a matter of time when he becomes that superstar level player.
Hmm.
And then obviously Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren are also going to be guys that are going to be superstars. And I think you'd argue right now, Kate, you think Wemby is a superstar. His team is so bad and he hasn't been able to win them games
I am the
that
biggest
I
Wemby
think,
fan that there is, but not yet.
yeah, like I think that's what I mean. Like I didn't know if you'd argue with me on that one, but I think that Wemby is going to be, same thing with Chet Holmgren. I think they're going to be superstars. We just got to wait on that. Like I think you got to give them some more time to develop and become the players they're going to be. And
Mm.
I think we'll end with this, Cage. I thought we were going to have more debate on this because I thought you were actually going to argue with me on Superstar with Tatum specifically. Is there anybody else of the young players you think is going to be a superstar? Because I've got a couple of guys that I think will be in that superstar conversation in a few years. I'm going to start throwing on some names, Cage, because it seems like you're drawing a blank.
Şengün.
Paulo Banchero. Paulo Banchero, I think, will be a superstar.
Hmm. I can see that.
I agree with Şengün. I think he could be a superstar. I don't think he's necessarily close yet, but because he's like Jokic light, I think you have to kind of give him that credit of he could be a superstar. I think John Morant, just looking at the Memphis Grizzlies, could be a superstar. He's just got to get healthy and get some of the off the court stuff behind him, I would say, to be able to be called a superstar. Cade Cunningham, I think, could be a superstar. His cap may just be star for Cade Cunningham, but I think you get him a good team that doesn't force him to be the guy, like necessarily like the guy who's going to make all the plays.
Yeah.
I think Cade Cunningham could be a superstar. I think he's got the intangibles, big guard, good passer, good rebounder. I think he could be a star. And Cage, this one, I'm surprised you haven't said him. Scotty Barnes. I think he could be a superstar. Now, I think he's really got to improve maybe the passing, and I know he's a good passer now. It's just he's gonna have to get that, or he's got to get a better 3-point shot. 34% is good, but it needs to be closer to 38 on more attempts.
Yeah.
So Scotty Barnes, again, has the potential, just like Halliburton, just like Ant. And obviously you'd say Ant and Halliburton are higher on that list than Scotty, but Scotty still makes the list as guys who could be superstars in the coming years, given the right development, which now you think Scotty is on that development with Coach Rajakovic in Toronto.
What about Markkanen?
I think he'll forever be a good star player, like a good second or third option. I don't think he'll ever be a great number one option because we've seen that in Memphis or in Utah, where he's a really good number one option for him, but he ain't winning games. So I think he's going to be a great second or third option on a good to great team. And I think that makes him a star player, not a superstar player. I'll be honest, Cage. Maybe one that maybe you can debate about a little bit quick. Zion Williamson.
I was about to say that.
I don't think Zion, like, unless he goes to a big market, because I do think market does affect it. I do, because of the media coverage, because of how much you see the player. Without looking at that truly, I'm not sure Zion will ever be a star player. Obviously, we thought he could be when he got drafted, but a lot of that shine's gone with the injuries, with the lack of playing time, with the lack of playing.
He's quietly had a really good season, though.
Like, yeah, he's been really good this year. I look at the numbers. He looks really good. But I can't say I think he'll ever be a superstar. I think he'll be a top-tier star player. I think he'll be on the cusp of superstar. I just don't know if he'll be the superstar, because I don't think he'll be the guy on New Orleans. And with that being said, can a superstar be the second best player in your team? I would say no. It's really rare. Like when Durant and Curry are playing on the same team, like that's when you've got two superstars and you got to pick which one you think's better. Like you don't just draft two superstars and keep them. You know how hard that is to do? Yeah. The Magic had that, you'd say, with Penny Hardaway and Shaq. Couldn't keep them together, and obviously Penny with the injuries never got to stay at that level. It's really hard to have two superstar players on the team at the same time. I think the Thunder are gonna have that problem in a couple of years with Shea and Chet Holmgren. Without saying all their other good to great players, like keeping those two guys in OKC is going to be a problem because they're both going to want the max. Because they're both going to be top tier NBA players. I think they've shown that this year, but I think they're going to continue to show that in the coming years. And again, I'm a massive fan of Chet Holmgren. We're both big fans of Shea because obviously Canadian, but also just a great player.
Yep.
But I think Zion's lost a lot of that shine from his Duke days to now.
I'm shocked you did not mention this name. I'm shocked we both didn't mention this name. Ja Morant.
I said Ja Morant.
Oh, you did?
I did say Ja Morant. I thought he could be a superstar. He just needs to leave off all the off-court issues. I think once he plays another full season and the Grizzlies have a good year, and they're back in the top 3, top 4 in the West, and some of the off-the-court issues become, distant memory, I think he could be a superstar. But a lot of those things got to kind of work themselves out, I would say.
Yeah.
And now, Cage will move off the NBA. We'll talk about the WNBA because another preseason game will be held here in Canada. I believe it's going to Montreal. And obviously, there's been a lot of speculation on a WNBA team playing in Toronto in the GTA. Because I think a massive crux right now, Cage, honestly, with an NBA team coming to the GTA, is they won't be able to play at Scotiabank Arena. I wouldn't say. Because of all the things that go on at Scotiabank Arena and the rent costs and all of those things.
And allegedly Ed Rogers.
Yeah. Which also doesn't help. But regardless of that, like, it's going to be very hard to get in a WNBA team to Scotiabank Arena. So that means they'd have to go to either Oshawa, Mississauga, maybe Hamilton.
Well, they also mentioned Coca-Cola Coliseum's a possible place.
That's fair, too, where the Marlies play downtown Toronto right at Exhibition. That also could work. But, like, if they aren't in the city of Toronto, it'll be Oshawa, Mississauga, or Hamilton, most likely. Maybe Brampton, but you'd say somewhere on the Lakeshore West line of train/subway. But Cage, I know you were there for that WNBA preseason game in Toronto, and I know it was a packed house. And
Yeah.
I know your feelings on that game because you and I spoke about it when it happened. Obviously, we were doing our roundtables class, and I heard you speak about it on our roundtable that we were on. Ironically, we had the same group that week. So I got to your in-depth voice. So we'll say it on here, Cage. You were there when the WNBA came to Toronto last year,
Yeah.
last preseason.
Yeah.
You were there in that packed house. What was your feeling when you watched that game at Scotiabank?
There is a fan base for a WNBA team in Toronto. There is support. We saw it with the PWHL, like unrelated, but with Toronto and they're playing at the Mattamy Athletic Center. There's a fan base for a women's team. It's proven with the PWHL, and I think it'll be proven especially if there's a WNBA team in Toronto. Now, kind of my main issue with that game was that I just felt like people were there just for show, just to be like, "Hey, I was there," but didn't watch good bad, but didn't. But basketball was kind of secondary in that sense. Um, that's why I kind of like what I mentioned, like something like Hoop Queens. That I really enjoyed because that was just high level basketball and that was just about hooping. Once again, shout out Nikisa Kumar Singh, founder of Hoop Queens. Uh, first paid women's basketball summer league in Canada, which is a pretty big deal and a trailblazer in terms of women's sports. We got to give her flowers while we're at it. Um, but yeah, like watching that WNBA game, it just kind of felt like it kind of felt like a big time social event. I don't know if that makes sense in that sense.
Well,
But there
Cage, what?
but there was a sellout crowd. Tickets sold out. There there are diehard there is a diehard fan base in Toronto for this. And it's very plausible if they can get the logistics right.
That is very true, Cage. It could be very interesting to see how a team in Toronto could do with obviously the right backing and if it's owned by MLSE or what would go down with that. But it's very interesting to me about the logistics of a WNBA team in Toronto because they're going to be the first WNBA team in Canada.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, Cage, I think WNBA, and I've spoken about this before, about I truly believe in having individual markets. I don't like when the NHL, the NBA, the NFL all have a team in one market because I think that is diluting the product. If, say, especially in Texas, where there's so many big places, say
Yeah.
the NBA said, you know what, we've got a team in San Antonio, we've got a team in Dallas, we got a team in Houston. Nobody's got Austin. Nobody's in Austin, Texas, the capital of the state. No one's like in El Paso or Waco. Waco, where the Baylor Bears play. Like there are markets that are untapped in every state, in every province here in Canada, where you could put a team that I think could work. Obviously, you need to be good, and the team can't suck forever because you will not gain fans that way. You cannot have a consistent loser. We've seen that in every sport. You
Mhm.
want to see a team that has bad attendance? Show me a team that sucks. It's rare that a really good team doesn't have attendance. It's very rare. Not saying it doesn't happen, but they're outliers. They're not the rule.
Tampa Bay Rays might be an exception.
Exactly. The Tampa Bay Rays are an exception. And it's because they play, and then this is a misconception with the Tampa Bay Rays. The Tampa Bay Devil Rays, formerly the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, do not play in Tampa Bay. They don't play in Tampa, Florida. They play in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is 20 minutes from downtown Tampa on an island. So during rush hour, where there's 3 bridges to get over, or 2 bridges to get over onto the island of St. Petersburg, it's like 45 minutes. That's like saying the Toronto Maple Leafs play in Toronto and they play in Hamilton. You know how long it would take to get from the city of Toronto to Hamilton down the QEW? Now with the construction going on the QEW, let alone before? Like, Cage, you and I have done the drive. Usually I went the other way, but I've taken the QEW to Mississauga, not even to Hamilton.
Yeah.
My drive from Mississauga to downtown Toronto was 25 minutes. The same distance as the train, ironically, to where I used to park.
Bruh.
During rush hour, it was more than an hour. Consistently. Like, it's not comparable. Like, with that being said, it's not in downtown Tampa. It's in a suburb of Tampa, which is why it is not, I would say, as attended. And plus, Tropicana is probably the worst diamond in baseball. No one likes Tropicana Field. The players like Tropicana. The fans like Tropicana. No one likes that diamond. When they rebuild, because they're building a new stadium in Tampa, in St. Petersburg, I should say, for the Rays, I think attendance will go up if it's a good ballpark
Mm.
because of just how bad Tropicana is as a ballpark. But anyway, with that being said, I think the WNBA could succeed in Vancouver or Montreal. I would even say going to one of the prairies like Calgary or Edmonton, or Regina. Like, you can succeed in a market that is less diluted. Like, Vancouver only has their hockey team. Had a basketball team, only have a hockey team. Calgary and Edmonton only have a hockey team. And if you want to include the CFL.
Yeah.
Regina's only got the CFL team. And their WHL team, which is the CHL, which is the junior hockey, major junior hockey. So, like, the WNBA could really put some oars into Canada if they really wanted to. Now, I'm not saying they want to move to Vancouver, want a team in Montreal, but they easily could.
Yeah.
And Toronto, I think, is the first step. Because also, let's be honest, Cage, if you put a team in Toronto, you could easily put a team in Hamilton too. Because not only is Toronto massive, the GTA is massive. Hamilton is far enough away, especially during rush hour, as we just mentioned, that you could have 2 WNBA teams in those 2 locations and not actually really affect the market of either. Obviously, if one's really good and one's not very good, that could swing the pendulum. But if they're both really good, you're not taking away from the audience.
Mm.
Like, you're not really. So I think the WNBA could really use a team in Toronto to then branch out in Canada. And again, I don't expect them to want to do that, but you easily could.
Yeah.
Especially with Seattle being down there on the West Coast, you could easily put a team in Vancouver. And that could be an easily rivalry between Seattle and Vancouver. But we'll just have to see, Cage, if the WNBA do decide to move to Toronto. I think they will. I just don't know when they will.
Mm.
I just hope if they do go to Toronto, that they do think about moving to Vancouver, going to Montreal, maybe adding an Edmonton or Calgary in there as well. And I'm not saying have 4 Canadian teams, but have another Canadian team. If that's Montreal, if that's Vancouver. I think it could really help the WNBA having a second team in Canada because of the lack of major sports in the country of Canada, especially outside of Toronto.
Yeah.
But we'll have to just see what the WNBA does decide to do. And we're going to end with this, Cage, because I think it's an easy conversation ender. With the NCAA seasons coming closer and closer to March Madness, conference tournaments are starting this coming week as regular seasons are ending. we're gonna pick a couple of teams we like for March Madness once we get there, without knowing seeding, without really picking who's gonna be number 1, number 2, number 3, because I think, as I told you off air, Cage, the bracket really matters. Who you have to play to make it to the Sweet 16, make it to the Elite Eight, is I think very important. But without looking at that, Cage, who would you say your favorite is for March Madness? Who do you think is going to take home the national championship in the NCAA this year? But again, the reigning champions being, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, my brain's just blanking. UConn, the UConn Hornets, the Huskies.
I was gonna say, like, I think that could also, no pick is safe in terms of in terms of who would win March Madness, because it's March Madness for a reason. But UConn's been there and done that, and they have no nonsense guys there too. It wouldn't try. Now the problem with UConn is now they're expected to. They're expected to. There's higher expectations because I think UConn I believe, was a 4 seed last year.
They were. They're going to be a 1 seed this year, obviously.
And they're going to be a 1 seed, so there's that extra level of pressure on them. But they've been there, done that. I think UConn could very well be a safe pick.
Anybody else, Cage, you really like?
A sleeper pick? Honestly, based off of how they've been playing all season and what they just did to Kansas, Houston's not a bad one either.
See, I love you say underdog, like your underdog pick, when Houston's number 1 team in the nation right now. And again, as you just mentioned, just put a 30-point win on the rank 14 Kansas Jayhawks.
Mm-hmm.
So you just picked the top 2 teams in the nation, kid. I'll make sure I say that. You picked the number 1 and number 2 teams in the country right now in UConn and in Houston. Just so you know.
Yeah, I know.
And again, I love Houston. I don't like their offense, but I love Houston. Purdue's a good option, I will say. So now we've mentioned all the top 3 teams in the country right now on the men's side of the pool.
You think they pull a Virginia, lose in the first round, and then win it all?
I think they could. I think they've got the talent, and ironically, they've kind of got the guys to do it. Like when you look back at that Virginia team, they returned basically everybody from that team. Purdue basically did the same thing, except for they lost. They lost, I think, a couple of guys to transfer, but they brought back Zach Edey, who's the reigning National Player of the Year. They have Braden Smith, who's a great passing guard in their system. They brought back Lawyer, who I'm a big fan of. They got a couple other guys, again, returning from last year's disappointing team. I really like them. Another number 1 seed that went out early, Arizona. I picked them to win it all last year. Maybe I was a year early because I still love the Arizona Wildcats. They returned quite a few guys from last year's disappointing team, just like Purdue did. They had Caleb Love through the transfer portal from UNC, who also went on the national championship run 2 years ago, failed last year. They're looking at another big run this year. They didn't make the tournament last year, might I add, after making the final the year before. They're looking to be another good team this year, are UNC, after sweeping Duke in the regular season as they get ready for conference play in the ACC. But I like Arizona. I am a big fan of them. And then looking at teams that are down the board that are going to be teams that I think will give the tournament some really big shocks. And it's kind of hard to pick teams because usually every team's got a couple flaws because, again, you don't have NBA bodies all over. I'm a big fan of Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. I don't know what they're going to look like in March Madness, but I am a big fan of Gonzaga. I think they can do damage. I feel the same way about SDSU. They just re-signed their head coach to a big year. Dutcher's a great coach. He's been great with them. He's been consistently winning there at SDSU, and I think that's going to continue this year in the tournament. They went deep last year in the March Madness NCAA tournament. I'm a big fan of Illinois, the Illini under Coach Underwood. I really like Coach Oates with Alabama. Obviously, both those teams are good offensively, not great defensively, but I still like them both. Obviously, I love Coach Drew and the Baylor Bears. I'm not sure I like them to win, but I do think they'll go pretty far, relatively speaking.
What
But
about Kentucky?
hmm?
What about Kentucky?
I don't like the way they recruit. I don't think they recruit well enough to be, because when you're usually a team that recruits top 10, top 15 guys, you don't win because you have guys that are one and done. You don't have program players. Normally teams that win are
Well, they just had a
program
big
players
win
like
against
Houston.
Tennessee.
That
At
is fair.
Hmm?
They beat Tennessee in Knoxville, the
Yep.
number 4 team in the nation at the time. They're going to go down in the next AP polls that are coming up this week. So that is not an argument by me, Cage. I just don't like Kentucky. I'm not a big fan of Kansas this year under Coach Self. You know, they're just not teams I like. I don't like Duke this year. I don't like UNC this year. I will admit though, I think UNC is the best team of those 4 of the Blue Bloods, but I don't like any one of the Blue Bloods, to be honest with you, to win this year in the NCAA tournament. But honestly, looking at some teams that I think will do damage in the NCAA tournament once we start getting teams made up. I'll be honest, Caitlin, this is a real dark horse pick. I like Michigan State.
Huh.
Now let me
Especially with how
explain.
they started.
They started horrible. They were 10-9 in conference play. They're 18-12. I think they're going to have a good run in the Big Ten. I think that's going to propel them to get a late bid into the NCAA tournament. And because of that, I think they could do damage beside the Big Ten teams of Purdue, of the Illini, who are really good teams, might I add. Looking at some other teams that are not currently ranked right now that I think could do damage in the NCAA tournament, just looking through the big conferences, trying to find some teams I like and that, I think, will really shock some teams going into the tournament. Just trying to find a team I like because it's really hard to find teams I like, obviously, that are not ranked, because when you're not ranked for a reason. You're having trouble in conference play. You're not being able to find wins that you need to get. I don't like any one of the Big East teams, to be honest. Well, you know what? I'm going to mention them. I don't think they're going to win the NCAA tournament because their offense is booty, is absolute garbage. But I love Virginia and I love Coach Bennett, so I will mention Virginia as a team that could shock some teams in the NCAA tournament. I genuinely believe that. I'm a big fan of Coach Bennett. I know how good he is as a coach. And I know that he's going to have his guys ready for the NCAA tournament because I assume Virginia's going to make it in as one of the lower seeds, one of the middling seeds, I should say.
Yeah.
Um,
Virginia Tech,
but
maybe?
I like VT, but I'm not sure what they're going to be able to do when it comes to just personnel. I will mention Loyola Chicago, always a great team in the NCAA tournament. I've had a couple really big runs.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what their team's going to look like this year, but I do think they're going to be a pretty good team, in my opinion. They do have a ranked team in their pool in the Dayton Flyers, who are lowly ranked right now. So we'll see who makes it out of the A10 as the champion. But I do think a couple teams will make it out of the conference. Another team that I actually don't know if they're ranked right now. I can quickly check though. I don't think they are currently. They are not. They have been ranked this year though. FAU, Florida Atlantic. They had the big run last year. Have quite a few guys returning. I don't know if they're gonna win it. I don't think. I'll also go as far as say I don't think FAU is gonna win it. I know I've said a lot of teams that I like, but again, Cage, as you mentioned, this is the point of March Madness. There's so many teams that are in it. There's so many teams that have a chance to win it. It's kind of hard to pick one. I'll mention FAU as my last team that I think could have a chance of winning it, or could have a chance of going far, I should say, because they did it last year. A lot of returning guys, and they are a pretty good team. So they could, do some damage when it comes to, especially when they get to conference play. And actually, they just beat a team that I also like, to be honest, in Memphis. I love Coach Hardaway with the Memphis, I believe it is Tigers. It is. And Memphis is a good team, and they got some really good players, including Naquan Tomlin, who got released from Kansas State, who was another one of the shock teams last year, who I was a big fan of, with Keontae Johnson and my guy Marquise Noel. And I think Memphis could be a really good team when it comes to the NCAA tournament once we start getting seeding. And I think we'll do this again, Cage, once we get seeding after the conference tournaments. But, I mentioned a bunch of teams. We'll quickly go through our teams we like in the women's side. The women's is normally less shocking than the men. There's less shocks. There were a lot of upsets last year, probably the most ever in the women's NCAA tournament.
Yeah,
And I think that'll continue this year because of how many good teams there are in the women's game in the NCAA. But I'll start. Obviously the undefeated South Carolina Gamecocks are an easy pick. But I'm going to say Iowa, obviously Caitlin Clark, and USC. Because they've got probably one of the best guards in the nation right now in Juju Watkins, who continues to have monster games. And I'm a big fan of her game, and I really like them. I will also mention Cage, take another top-ranked team. I'll take Cameron Brink, and I'll take the Stanford Cardinals. Another really good team that's going to be a problem. And I have one more I want to mention, Cage, but I want to give you the floor to mention some teams you like on the women's side of the bracket.
I mean, obviously there's South Carolina. Iowa with Caitlin Clark, they're always going to be a problem. LSU's had their issues, had their ups and downs, but they do have the talent to win it all again.
They do. I agree with that.
And you said Stanford. You said UC.
I did.
UC.
There's one more team I want to mention, Kate. I want to see if you take them from me.
Trying to think. Go ahead.
UConn. Obviously, Ariyama is a great coach, multi-time world champion, or UC, I should say,
it, but I don't know
NCAA
if the
champion.
injury woes are going to be too much to overcome.
That is very true. They are very injured. They were very injured last year. They're very injured this year. But I just think Aaliyah Edwards, so good. Paige Beckers, so good. Beckers coming back next year, will probably be the first overall pick in next year's WNBA draft. They're going to have Azzi Fudd next year. They're going to lose Edwards this year. They're going to get Ice Brady back. They're going to get Alfie back. They're going to get a bunch of girls back next year. But I even think this year with Beckers,
for
Edwards,
me, I think next year's their year.
I agree. No, I agree with you 100% next year. I would say they're the favorite.
I just think there's just way too much there's just way too many talented teams out there.
Oh no, I definitely agree with you there, Cage, that there are just so many good teams, and that it's gonna be very hard for UConn to pull off an NCAA championship win. But they have the experience and they have the talent, and obviously Coach Ariyama is so good that I would not be surprised if UConn does go deep again. I just don't know if they're going to be able to win it. That's what I'll say. I think they'll go deep, kind of like I think UCLA is kind of in that same boat. I think they'll go far. I just don't know if they're going to be able to win it this year. Because it's so hard to win 2 in a row. If UConn wins this year and makes it 2 in a row, they'll be the first team to win back-to-back national championships on the men's side since 04-05 Florida. I believe it's 04-05 Florida. Actually, it might be 08-09 Florida is where I may be conflating that. Because they had Joakim Noah and they had Corey Brewer and they had Al Horford all win the first national championship, and then they all came back to win a second national championship.
Yeah.
As I quickly again run, it was 06-07. I split the difference.
Mm-hmm.
They were 06-07 national championships. Ironically, their head coach, current Bulls head coach, Billy Donovan, who was a back-to-back national championship team, the last 2-time reigning men's national champions. So we'll see if UConn can do it since the first time since 06-07. I don't think they will be able to. I think they'll go far, but I love Arizona. I like Purdue. And again, there's so many good teams, especially on the men's. I don't think there's one clear-cut team, which is why this year's going to be even more insane, because there aren't those teams where you're like, that team's great, that team's great. Every team that's even great, you're like, they have these issues, they don't have this player, that player. This March Madness on the men's side, especially, Cage, I think could be the most just wild we've seen in a really long time.
I agree. I have to agree. Like men's and women's.
Yeah, the women's had a lot of upsets last year. It'll be really interesting to see if that continues this year. With just the way things have gone.
Mm.
But I think that's it, Cage. Is there anything else you want to say before we go?
Remember how you told me to take a dog if they're down at the half?
I did tell you off the air. I told you to take Arizona if they're down at the half to or any point if Arizona became a dog at any point tonight, take them over USC. And they are now down against USC on the men's side of the pool in their last game of Pac-12 play before they get to Pac-12 conference play to see who will be the conference champion in the Pac-12, which again will affect seeding once we get to the NCAA tournament. Winning your conference championship is very important.
Yep.
So we'll see who are the conference champions as the weeks go by. Anything else you want to mention, Kate, before we go?
I think that's it.
Well, that's it. All it all through for Cajun Theroux, Thanny Castle. I'm Spencer Byers. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Polar Opposites here on the Outrage Inc.